Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to return to a brewery that has featured on the channel a couple of times before. I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the years, but the one that we're going to have a look at today is a style that I've not had from them so far. So for this review then, we are going to head up towards the Stockholm area. We're going to go out to the west of the city to Ekerö, and that means that we're going to have a look at another beer from Northern Exposure Brewing Company, previously known as Nordic Kiwi Brewers. So this particular beer is called the Stockholm Pils. It comes in at 4.7% ABV, and I think you know what style this beer is, but this was released as part of the Lokalt Småskaligt assortiment through Systembolaget here in Sweden for February of 2021. I think the exact release date was in fact the 1st of February this month. It varies depending on weekends and things like this. But yeah, this beer is hopped with Motueka hops from New Zealand, which usually give you a lovely big kind of limey flavour, although they are fairly low in alpha acid by comparison to some others. I think maybe around 7-8% alpha acid actually. But yeah, very, very curious to see how my first Pilsner beer from these guys turns out, and hopefully it's as good as the IPAs and Paleos and things that I've had from them in recent times. This is one of two beers that you'll see reviewed from these guys incidentally across February 2021. The other one is from their Microcosm series, and that is a Paleo, so you can look forward to that. But yeah, nice to return to these guys after what feels like a little while, and as always I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this beer. So let's get started then. So as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Northern Exposure Brewing Company before, and there'll also be a link down there to the Nordic Kiwi Brewer stuff as well, so you can look at the older beers they used to do. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel of course has a geography based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's constantly being added to, and as always please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, to tell you a little bit about Northern Exposure Brewing Company then, on to my brewery notes. So this brewery, as I've mentioned to you already, was founded originally as Nordic Kiwi Brewers, and they're based in Ekerö, just out to the west of Stockholm. And the two men behind the company are two New Zealanders, Craig Donovan and Karen Beattie, and they started the company up back in 2014. But apparently they began home brewing because Swedish beer was very expensive, although I say this in every video, it surprises me that they think Swedish beer is expensive, because I remember New Zealand being more expensive back in 2015 when I was there. But they began buying hops from Nelson, which is a big hop producing region on, I want to say, the South Island in New Zealand, if I'm remembering rightly. But they started importing all these New Zealand hops for their home brewing, and then they later set up a commercial brewery in a room using equipment that they bought mainly from Blocket, which is the Swedish equivalent of, you know, Craigslist in America or Gumtree in Australia, New Zealand, England and things like that as well. But these guys both had connections to Sweden. Karen apparently met his Swedish lady in New Zealand, and then the pair later moved to London. He spent some time working in the construction industry together before they moved together to Sweden, and then Karen worked full-time at the brewery initially while Craig was working part-time, and he also worked for Ericsson, which was what brought him to Sweden in the first place. But the niche of this brewery is that they brewed all of their beers originally with New Zealand hops. They still use a lot of New Zealand hops in their beers these days, but not exclusively, and since 2017 both of these guys have been working full-time in the brewery. But in late 2018 they moved to a larger premises in Ekerö because they outgrew their original space, and that year they had brewed around 100,000 litres of beer, and they managed to double that across 2019. They hired a new New Zealand brewer, a new Kiwi brewer I guess I should say, to join the team, and they've been installing a new brew kit recently from what I understand as well, and that's kind of coincided with the release of the 440ml cans that they're now doing. They used to sell all their beers in little 330s actually. If you go away and look at my early reviews from these guys, you will see that all of those beers were 330 millilitres. But at the end of 2019 they also made the decision to change the brewery name to Northern Exposure Brewing Company, and they said that the main idea behind this was that they wanted The main idea behind this was that they wanted a name that was a little bit more kind of international and recognisable. Apparently, Swedish people didn't make the connection between New Zealand and the Kiwi bird, if you like. So that was one of the main reasons they changed it. But you know, I thought I still feel a little bit sad about that. I did like the name Nordic Kiwi. I thought that was pretty cool. But you know, Northern Exposure is a nice name, and their new branding and stuff is pretty spot on. But they, at that point as well, that was when they took the decision not to use exclusively New Zealand hops. So they're using a mix of American, Australian and New Zealand hops in their beers these days. But as of February 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, they've released around 25 different beers under the Northern Exposure name, and I think there was roughly about the same number released previously under the Nordic Kiwi Brewers name. So collectively, I guess this company has released in the region of 50 to 60 different kinds of beer. So yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Northern Exposure Brewing Company for the moment. I've had some really nice IPAs from these guys over the years. They've got a series that they do called Chaos and Clive, which is done with 2 artists, if I remember rightly, from Stockholm, so you should definitely check those beers out. Those are pretty nice. I reviewed some of the early versions of those, but I tend to kind of stick to the kind of more quirky beers that they release actually, but maybe I should have a look at one of the newer versions of Chaos and Clive actually. But yeah, these guys, they do some really nice beers. Their IPAs are good. The one that I would recommend particularly would be Dolphin Love. That's their kind of flagship IPA that they do, and that is a really, really pretty awesome beer, I have to say. But yeah, definitely check these guys out if you get the chance. But that's all I can tell you. If you want to learn more, check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn more about all the different beers that these guys have done. At some point you probably will see these guys on a Meet the Brewery segment. They were interested. I did talk to, I think it was Karen that I spoke to, if I remember rightly, through the messenger. These guys are definitely interested to do a kind of Meet the Brewery segment at some point. So the next time I make it to Stockholm and this whole COVID-19 pandemic is over, we need to make that happen. So fingers crossed that won't be too far in the future. But yeah, let's get on and actually have a taste of this beer then. So I'll just let you have a little look at the artwork of this one before we open it up. As you tend to get these days from Northern Exposure Brewing Company, it's got that lovely kind of painted sort of sunset-y sort of thing on it. Their new artwork, I have to say, I really do like. The new artwork on the Northern Exposure branding is definitely better than what they had on the Nordic Kiwi stuff. It would be cool to see them have just, you know, a little bit of a kind of New Zealand Maori type artwork though. If you go to New Zealand and you see the little Maori houses and stuff, the artwork on them is beautiful. But I love, you know, these wood crafted things with the little paintings and stuff. The Aboriginal art in Australia is very cool as well actually. I mean, I love like wood paintings and carvings and stuff. Those are pretty cool. But yeah, this one, as I said to you earlier in the video, it comes in at 4.7% ABV, 440ml can, and I honestly can't remember what I paid for this. I would guess it must be around 30 Swedish kronor, something like this. So that translates to roughly about €3, maybe about £2.50, something like that. And for those of you in the States, maybe like $3.25, $3.50, something like that. But yeah, 4.7% Pilsner, Motueka hops from New Zealand, lovely big limey flavours with about 7 to 8% alpha acid, if I remember rightly. But yeah, let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting then. Very curious to see what this has in store for us. But yeah, look at this. Very, very nice. As I always say, you know, when it comes to Pilsners, you can use a proper kind of Pilsner glass if you like, but I prefer to use these tulips. I think the tulip is, you know, the best kind of all-round glass for different beer styles. So I tend to stick to this, to be honest, unless, you know, it's a German or Czech beer or something that I'm looking at. But yeah, I think this should be really nice. As you can see, it's poured a lovely, I would say very slightly naturally hazy pale golden straw colour. You can see there's about a solid half finger of a frothy, I would say kind of creamy coloured head on this one. I don't think that's a perfect white head, but there's one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of the head there. But overall, it does look really nice, and you can see the level of natural haze that this beer has. It's just obviously kind of unfiltered. But yeah, in terms of a Pilsner, not surprising at all. If you actually shine the light through this, you can see the tiny, tiny little pits, the tiny, tiny little particles just suspended in the liquid. It's pretty cool. I wonder if my fridge is maybe a little touch too cold, but I don't know. But you know, natural haze on beers is something that I personally really like. You will tend to find that the Czech Pilsen beers are a little bit more hazy, if you like, a little bit more natural and hazy than the German Pilsners. So the story of the Pilsner beer, of course, is that it was developed in the city of Pilsen, which is now the Czech Republic, formerly the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The brewmaster who developed this, I believe, was Bavarian, if I'm remembering rightly, and the very first Pilsner beer is what is now Pilsner Urquell, or Plzeňský Prazdroj, as the Czechs call it, although I probably butchered that pronunciation. But yeah, I've actually been to the Plzeňský Prazdroj, Pilsner Urquell brewery, and it was pretty damn cool, I have to say. I really enjoyed visiting there. The brewery actually took me and gave me a tour and everything. It was great. But yeah, that's your story of the Pilsner beer, and it's a lager beer. So lager beers, technically speaking, cold temperature fermentation, usually between 10 to 12 degrees that the fermentation takes place, and yeah, I guess we should say like bottom fermenting yeasts is what you use for these. But yeah, looks the part. Let's take a closer look at the aroma then and just see how we get on. Ooh, that smells quite interesting. Yeah, so it's interesting that it does have an almost, there's definitely a good bit of yeasty quality coming out of this beer. You can smell a little bit of an almost kind of farmhousey thing going on with this one. So this does give me the impression that it's quite a sort of yeasty Pilsner actually. I've had similar, I actually had a Pilsner from, Stockholm Brewing Company that had this sort of farmhousey yeasty type thing to it. And I'm not sure if it's a case of organic grains or if it's the way the yeast interacts with some of the hops and things like that. I've really never figured out exactly what it is. But you get, in the base of this beer, there's quite a bit of breadiness to it. There's a bit of graininess in there, some woodiness and stuff like that. It really just comes across as being very slightly farmhousey, actually. So this is quite interesting. You often get this in some New England IPAs and stuff, you know, New England IPAs and paleos. But yeah, there's definitely a wee bit of a kind of farmhousey, yeasty, woody kind of thing coming out of the aroma of this beer. But on top of that, you can smell the kind of crisp Pilsner malt in this one. You do get a bit of that kind of crispness out of the beer. There's a good little bit of a kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity sort of thing coming out of it too. So yeah, the aroma of this beer is, you know, pretty interesting from that perspective, I have to say. So yeah, take a little bit of time and just enjoy that side of it. It's quite interesting. So quite a yeasty leaning Pilsner beer, this one in my opinion, but when you get past that, you can pick up the more, you know, you do start to pick up the more kind of biscuity and sweet side of things there. But remember, the main difference for me between the German Pilsners and the Czech Pilsens would be just that yeasty component. The German ones always come across as a little bit kind of drier and a little bit more kind of crisp, if that makes sense, whereas the Czech ones are a bit smoother and a bit more kind of bready and stuff like that. And generally speaking, when it comes to the differences between the German and Czech lagers, in my experience, that sort of hypothesis, if you like, does hold true. So yeah, it's just really quite yeasty in that sense. But on the hoppy side of things, it's interesting. You've got a nice big kind of floral aromatic quality coming out of the beer. You would expect that with these New Zealand hops. I love my Kiwi hops. But yeah, the New Zealand hops, even though a lot of them are quite low in alpha acid, you know, some of them are only like 3 and 4% alpha acid and stuff like this, they always give you a big fruity and big, you know, kind of floral kick actually. So you do get quite a nice big floral aromaticity out of this beer. I don't know whether I would call it spicy, to be honest, but it really does have a good level of aromaticity to it, come to think. But you've got a nice kind of zesty, grassy quality in there, and I think there's a wee touch of earthiness as well, but that could be from the sort of yeasty side of things that's coming out of this beer. So I mean, overall, it's pretty, it is pretty interesting from that side of things, to be honest with you. So yeah, I do like how this. I do like how everything goes together in the aroma of this beer. On the fruity side of things, it's quite an oily, limey character that you get out of this one. Other than that, you know, there's maybe like a wee touch of like a peary, appley sort of thing to it. But yeah, to me, it's quite an oily, it's just an oily, limey character you get out of this one. As I've said before, the New Zealand hops for me are, you know, quite distinctively oily in a lot of ways. So yeah, that's another interesting point to make about this beer, for sure, I would say. Yeah, just take a little bit of time and enjoy the aroma of that before you get stuck in, but I think it's time to try this one now. I have to say I'm curious about this beer. So yeah, this one is the Stockholm Pilsner, coming in at 4.7% ABV from Northern Exposure Brewing Company, hopped with Motueka hops from New Zealand. I think this might be the first Pilsner that I've had with these hops in them actually. So let's get stuck in. Slàinte, skål, cheers, and nice to return to Northern Exposure once again. Yeah, that's pretty nice actually, I have to say. Yeah, it's interesting, this one. It actually comes across as quite a wet and quite oily Pilsner in a sort of way, and I guess that kind of suits the profile of these New Zealand hops to an extent. You know, I've always enjoyed these New Zealand hops since I was out there in New Zealand because of that. And I think this slightly more kind of oily mouthfeel that they've got going on here works for it. You know, the main thing that I would normally associate with a Pilsner beer, I would always want these, you know, to be really authentic and either like a German or a Czech one. What I would say about this beer is that it doesn't really fit either of those categories, to be honest with you. This is quite a wet, but still quite sensible Pilsner beer. So this one, the mouthfeel is quite different. The other thing I would say about this is that the sort of yeasty component that I was picking up on this one, it comes out a little bit in the flavour, but not, you know, it doesn't dominate as the aroma suggests it might, you know. So it's actually a really interesting beer, this one actually. Need to stop saying actually, but this one it's kind of got me a little bit. I'm like, what do we say about this? What do we say about this beer? But would I drink it again? Yeah, I think that's the main thing. And it has that nice kind of sort of quenchability, if you like that. You can sort of quaffability. Brain is not working these days, guys. But yeah, it's got that nice kind of drinkability to it, this one, which is what you want from a Pilsner beer. You know, if I was blind tasting it, I might think it was some sort of like golden ale. I think, you know, because it's the Pilsner side of it, the sort of lager side of it comes out more in the aftertaste more than anything. So yeah, I like how I like that bit of it. It kind of starts off more like an ale, if that makes sense, or a little bit more like a Helles, maybe a German Helles, but then it starts to, you know, it starts to become more kind of Pilsner-like in the aftertaste. You'll feel that kind of Pilsner malt dryness pushing its way out a little bit later on. But let's try and break down the flavour of this one then and see how we go. So yeah, straight away with this beer, you get a nice kind of smooth bready note just blanketing the middle of your tongue. But again, it feels quite oily in a sense as well, quite wet and slightly oily. And you're always going to get that with Scandinavian beers, I find. The mouthfeel of these beers is very clean, and the water is that clean that it just feels slightly oily. So straight away with this beer, you can feel a little bit of that kind of bready sort of thing there. It almost comes across as very, very slightly wholemeal bready, but you can really feel in the middle, if you go down the middle line of your tongue, you can feel that Pilsner malt dryness coming out of the beer. And I've said in reviews before, Pilsner malt is a pain in the arse to describe because it really just gives you more of a kind of mouthfeel element than it does a sort of flavour, if that makes sense. Pilsner malt for me is more kind of mouthfeel thing than it is about the flavour. But yeah, you can feel sort of very slightly wholemeal, grainy bread thing underneath, but then down the middle line of your palate there, you've got a nice kind of more Pilsner malt kind of crispness to the beer. And if you go to the very centre of that middle third of your tongue, there's a sort of sweet, you get a little bit of that kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity sort of thing, that very slightly kind of boozy alcohol caramelly sort of thing there. You can feel the slightly alcohol-y flavours in the middle of the palate there too, which, pardon me, is quite nice. But yeah, as you go further back into the border region between middle third and back third of your palate, you can feel there is a wee touch of a sort of bread crusty type graininess to the beer, and then on the back third of your palate, it's distinctly more kind of crisp, dry and grainy, if that makes sense. So a lot of those elements kind of sitting out there. So the back third of your palate is a little bit thicker, to be honest with you. So as you move further forward, as you move further forward from the back of the palate, you can feel that thickness is there, but then it drops away, and as you move into the kind of middle third of your tongue, you can feel that middle third of your palate is distinctly more sort of oily than the back third of your palate. The back third is a bit more kind of grainy, but both middle third and back third of the palate have a good bit of dryness to them, actually. So yeah, interesting for sure. But on the hoppy side of things then, in the back corners of the palate, you've got a nice little bit of earthiness to the beer, but as you move further forward it gets a little bit more kind of herbal, and as you reach the kind of front corners of the palate, you've got a nice little bit of floral aromaticity coming out of this one. And as I say, this is one of the traits of the New Zealand hops that give you that lovely big kind of floral aromatic quality. So yeah, on the you know, on the front kind of corners of the palate, you do get a wee bit of kind of spiciness. You do get a little bit of kind of floral spiciness just building out of this beer, but this is definitely, you know, it's not going to blow the head off you in terms of IBUs. We'll come back to that in a minute. But round the front curve of the palate, the beer is distinctly more kind of light and grassy, and it does have a wee touch of zestiness to it as well. But behind the front curve of your tongue, that's on the front third of your palate, that's where you get that nice oily bubble where those juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. And for me, this one's got a nice, it really does have a nice kind of just slightly citrusy leaning kind of thing there. So if you go towards the back of that front third of your palate, you can feel there's a wee bit of a kind of slightly more concentrated kind of citrusy sort of thing, and on the border region there's a wee bit of kind of bready graininess again. But as you move further forward from that, you've got some nice kind of you do have a little bit of a kind of more oily kind of limey character coming out of this beer too, which is which I have to say I think is very, very nice. I do like that about this beer. So yeah, I think for me this one goes together very nicely in that regard. Yeah, yeah, I think that as you move further forward on that front third of your palate there, it does develop, you get a few little kind of peary esters I think coming out of this one, but then the front half of that front third of your palate, that's when you get the more kind of oily limey notes out of it, and that's the kind of trademark thing of the Motueka hop variety. So yeah, I do like how that goes together in this one for sure. So yeah, thumbs up to Northern Exposure Brewing Company for this one. I think they've pulled off a nice kind of solid beer, this one. I have had a few beers that have this yeasty thing in the aroma, and I've never quite figured out what it is. And I have to say, this is one of the things that makes me want to take like a Cicerone qualification, just to, you know a bit more about the kind of chemistry of beer. I have a chemistry and astrophysics background, of course, so maybe, you know, there's a few things telling me maybe I should take the Cicerone qualification and just learn a wee bit more about these things. Yeah, because the interest is there, definitely. But then again, the whole point of the channel was to be, you know, sort of off the cuff and just for a bit of fun. It feels a little bit serious to do a Cicerone qualification, but there we go. But yeah, I have to say, this is a nice Pilsner beer. For me, more of a kind of oily beer. If I was blind testing this, I'm not sure if I would think it was a golden ale or a Helles, to be honest with you. It doesn't have the sort of breadiness and smoothness, if you like, of the Czech varieties, nor does it have the kind of crisp, the real crispness and dryness that you'd expect of the German ones, although in fairness, in the aftertaste that does develop. It is a more kind of oily, just kind of lager beer, this one, in a lot of ways. But I mean, you can argue about styles all day. The main question is it a good beer? Yes. And that's, for me, yeah, I would certainly, I wouldn't hesitate to drink this one again. It would be cool to see these guys open up their own bar in the centre of Stockholm or something like that, or in Ekerö where they're based. But you know, probably maybe that's something they'll look at in the future. I'm not sure if they're hosting things at the brewery. As I say, I want to get these guys on the channel at some point soon anyway. But yeah, in terms of the mouthfeel then, as I've said to you, this beer is quite an oily lager beer. I would describe it as the kind of bottom end of mid-bodied. For a lager beer though, it is quite, you know, sort of big and full, if that makes sense. The carbonation is quite smooth. The mouthfeel overall, as I've repeated a few times, is oily. In terms of IBUs, I think we're talking a fairly standard, you know, 20, 25 IBUs with this beer. I'm leaning towards saying 20, to be honest with you. But it's got a really nice kind of smoothness to it. As I say, the malt base, the malt in the yeasty side of the beer is quite smooth. You get a bit more dryness out of it later on. You get a wee touch of sweetness from the kind of boozy alcohol elements, and then you've got a nice kind of oily, fruity character to this one as well, a sort of oily limey note. And it's just got a wee touch of zestiness to it at the same time. But yeah, I like how this beer goes together. It gets a thumbs up from me. I certainly wouldn't hesitate to drink it again. So yeah, definitely pick this one up and see if you get a chance to have a go at it. I'm not sure if they will make this a kind of flagship beer, if you like a kind of regular brew, but I think, you know, I think this one could turn out to be a fairly solid seller for them, to be honest with you. A lot of people like the lager beers, and I'm glad to see that lager beers are getting a bit more attention these days. It was always about the IPAs and hazy stuff for a long time, but we're starting to see, pardon me, the beer sector kind of re-diversify a little bit. More black IPAs, more West Coasters and things like that, and more lager beers as well, which is great. So I'm glad that we're seeing this. There's more variety out there these days than there was maybe at the start of 2020, the end of 2019, when it was all just haze craze. But yeah, thumbs up to Northern Exposure for this one. I've enjoyed reviewing this beer. It's always nice to review the different beers from these guys, and you will see me review the Pale Ale at some point quite soon as well. So let's leave it at that for this one. This one was the Stockholm Pils, 4.7% ABV with motorway hops from New Zealand, from Northern Exposure Brewing Company in Ekerö, just out to the west of Stockholm. Thank you again for watching my reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Northern Exposure Brewing Company, or Nordic Kiwi Brewers as they were previously known. And do let me know some other lager beers that I should check out as well. I'm really enjoying my sort of lager phase that I'm having here on the channel at the moment, so let me know some other ones. Thank you again for watching, and catch you guys on the next review. Slàinte, skål, cheers, make sure you check out Northern Exposure Brewing Company.